Good morning and welcome everyone to another edition of the 81st session for the Senate Commerce and Labor Committee. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Senator Hardy. Here. Senator Lang. Here. Senator Neal.
Here.
Senator Pickard. Here. Senator Scheibel. Senator Settlemyre. Here. Chair Spearman.
Here. All right, so welcome to all of our audience who's joining us remotely and be able to testify on the record. If you do not get a chance to testify, you can always submit your information, submit your comments via fax. You'd like to receive electronic notification, please contact our committee members on the email that's listed. All the exhibits must be submitted no later than 8 o'clock the day and posted on Nellis. If you are presenting an amendment, this is very listened yesterday via the YouTube channel, and this is, we will open up the hearing on Assembly Bill 327. We have relating to cultural competency. And I will say to everyone listening, this is something that we have worked diligently on since 2017. And thank you, Assemblywoman and Dr. Chapel-Love and Ms. Mingo for pursuing this. This is something that you all know is near and dear to my heart. And so with that,
Spearman and members of the committee, for the record, I am Assemblywoman Selena Torres, and I proudly represent Assembly District 3. This measure requires mental health professionals to complete continuing education relating to cultural competency and diversity, equity, and inclusion. Last session, we passed two bills, SB 364 and SB 470, which were both heard in this committee and require medical facilities licensed in Nevada to follow various procedures surrounding cultural competency in the workplace. These procedures include anti-discrimination policies and the annual completion of a certified cultural competency training. As many of you know, cultural competency training focuses on skills and knowledge that value diversity, understand and respond to cultural differences, and increase awareness of providers and care organizations' cultural norms. Last summer, Dr. Sandra Gray, who is a licensed Nevada psychologist, reached out to me expressing her interest in ensuring that all licensed mental health professionals in Nevada also receive training on cultural competency, not just those persons employed by a medical facility. Unfortunately, Dr. Gray cannot be with us today as she had a previous engagement, but I want to ensure for the record that it reflects her commitment to social justice and professional development for all mental health providers and her commitment to ensuring that cultural competency training is accessible to all mental health professionals in the state of Nevada. We know that effective health communication is as important to healthcare as a clinical skill. There is strong evidence that cultural competency training for healthcare and mental health professionals improves providers' knowledge and understanding and skills for treating patients from culturally, linguistically, and socioeconomically diverse backgrounds. During my childhood, I experienced firsthand how important it is for health professionals to have cultural competence training. My father, who fled the Salvadoran Civil War as a teenager, suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder. While he sought help from healthcare professionals, he struggled to find someone who understood his cultural identity. If those healthcare professionals had training, my father would have had access to much better care much earlier in his life. Understand, respect, and value all the cultural differences and perspectives towards mental health. I'll now go ahead and give a short bill summary. AB 327 requires a behavior analyst, psychiatrist, physician assistant, and many more other mental health professionals practicing under the supervision of or those individuals practicing under those individuals to complete at least 2 hours of instruction concerning cultural competency and diversity, equity, and inclusion as part of his or her cultural, her continuing education each biennium. At the request of the Nevada Nursing Association, the same requirement is expected of all nurses. It just made it more consistent because there's no different way that a nurse is licensed in a mental health care provider versus a nurse that just works in a hospital. And they recognized how important it was that all nurses have this cultural competency training. This does not add additional training requirements to the previously mentioned professionals. Rather, the legislation requires that of the training that they are presently required, they complete 2 CEUs in cultural competency. Additionally, this bill requires that boards and associations that oversee continuing education units shall accept the training received under NRS 449103. So the training that they're already receiving could count towards those credits if they receive it in a facility now. This amendment will also allow for employees of medical facilities that are required to complete the training in accordance of SB 364 from the 2019.
Committee member, okay? Dr. Chappell-Love, welcome.
Thank you, Chair Spearman. Always a pleasure. So thank you to the chair and committee, as well as assembly psychologists in the state of Nevada. I'm the owner of L Psychological Services, LLC, a small private practice in the Las Vegas, Nevada area, and I'm also a resident of Nevada. And related to the mental health field, I've trained and practiced in that field since my graduate training began for the communities that we try and serve. The ethical principles of psychologists hold 5 general to the well-known medical field praxis or principle of first, do no harm. We psychologists hold this first principle high as a message to seek and safeguard the welfare and rights of those with whom we interact professionally and other affected persons. To the assembly member's point, the state of Nevada has seen challenges in the field of mental health from the noted doctoral practitioner shortage to the later response in the past year and continuing response to the COVID-19 and racism crises. Having recently identified racism as a public health crisis, Nevada now has an opportunity to create legislation that would mandate that mental health practitioners practice in an ethical manner when it relates to multicultural competencies. Far from being a monolith or ever being fully achievable throughout one's career, mental health practitioners seek training in multicultural competencies as a part of our training. This is something that we continue to do throughout our careers, and I believe it's very important to do so. Indeed, I graduated from a doctoral level APA accredited program that, per its accreditation standards, mandated training in counseling issues related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, what we now call DE&I. Now, as a practicing psychologist, I see no reason to stop seeking better and more current training, as this, as it did back then, will allow me to provide better care for the communities that I and others like me serve. There's certainly excellent research related to higher rates of Latinx communities, African American communities, indigenous communities, having higher rates of things related to racial trauma, for example, PTSD, other trauma-related conditions. Certainly misdiagnosing are another thing that mental health professionals see a lot related specifically to cultural, socioeconomic, ability level, neurodivergent, unvergent, and other related DE&I factors. To borrow from a local psychologist, Dr. Sandra Gray, research indicates that a lack of cultural responsiveness may result in a lack of sensitivity to cultural differences in symptom presentation, consequently leaving clinicians vulnerable to their own implicit biases, stereotypes, and negative attitudes to certain populations, this being due to their lack of training and culturally responsive assessment and diagnosing. This is from Neighbors et al. In 2003. AB 327 would make mandatory continuing education requirements related to DE&I, which is diversity, equity, inclusion again, for mental health providers for license renewal. This is something we do every 2 years in the psychologist field. Currently, psychologists are required to obtain 30 continuing education credits in a 2-year period for license renewal. Of those 30 credits, 6 are required to be in ethics and 2 are in suicide training. A lack of cultural understanding by mental health providers due to a lack of education and training in DE&I is not only a competency issue, but as I said before, it's an ethical one as well. Culturally responsive treatment is espoused as a basic tenet of all mental health accrediting bodies in the U.S. However, there are no current licensure requirements in Nevada, as there are for suicide prevention and ethics. Currently, other states have moved toward this or are currently moving towards this, to include New Mexico, District of Columbia, Georgia, Maryland, Texas, Arizona is reportedly moving towards this as well. Those are currently the states that are requiring continuing education credits specific to DE&I for mental health practitioners. As stated, continuing ed requirements are intended to ensure that licensed mental health professionals stay current, informed, and provide the best and most up-to-date care possible for the individuals that we're providing treatment for. We certainly must practice cultural humility, which is, as I said, a lifelong journey as well. We must understand not only the unique challenges faced by diverse communities, but also to comprehend cultural background, value systems, and appropriate evidence-based treatment approaches that address mental health challenges from a culturally responsive and intersectional perspective. Diversity education is a necessity, not for Nevada, for all states, and that's why I'm speaking today on this. And it's also an opportunity for us to learn more fully about groups who've historically been marginalized based on race, ethnicity, sex or gender, sexual orientation, among other social identities. In summary, I'm a licensed psychologist, Dr. Lauren Chapel-Love, and I'm also practicing in the state of Nevada, and I'm here to support AB 327. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr.
Chapel.
Thank you. And I believe that I have Ms. Denisha Bingo on. Is she on the Zoom? Okay, perhaps not. She wasn't able to make it this morning, and that's completely understandable. I know that obviously this hearing kind of was put together quickly, but I just want to echo the remarks of Dr. Chapel-Love and make it known to the committee that a lot of mental health professionals have reached out to me to express their support of this piece of legislation, and we worked diligently in the Assembly to draft a piece of legislation that made sense for this profession. And I appreciate all the stakeholders for coming together so that we could get this piece of legislation ready. And something that I think is going to positively impact hardworking Nevada families. Thank you. I now stand open for any questions for AB 327.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. Committee members, any questions?
How do we, can you see us, Madam Chair?
I can see you.
All right. If I may. Thank you. I thank you for the presentation. Quickly done. I'm smiling. And so I've heard the word ethics multiple times in the conversation. Would this count for the ethics requirement as well, knowing that part of the practice of medicine is being ethical, which was referenced today?
Thank you for the question, Senator Hardy. Assemblywoman Selena Torres, for the record, to my knowledge, the answer to that would be no. Ethics training would be completely different than cultural competency training. I think that the point that Dr. Chapel-Love was making was that ethics is a similar type of requirement that we have for medical professionals, and that cultural competency is an additionally important and similarly important type of training that mental health professionals should receive.
Thank you.
Additional questions?
Yes, Madam Chair. Woman Torres, I was just wondering who's going to do the training, right? I mean, so couple things. You're right on point. I've had a family member.
Is the lack of mental health professionals from diverse backgrounds. We know that we don't have enough mental health professionals of color, and just by luck, for whatever reason, the ones that I do know personally are all mental health providers of color, which I think is phenomenal, and that shows like a change in the profession. This legislative body passed SB 364 in 2019, which I think kind of sets some of that groundwork, right? Requiring that cultural competency training for individuals that do work in the healthcare facilities. And so I think that there's a lot of ways that, these boards can make the decision to kind of work in collaboration with what has already been done by this legislative body. Additionally, it would be up to each of these boards to determine what would count for that, right? What training, what classes are available, what continuing education units are available. And, I understand that there's this the greater issue though of like what's available now. Perhaps Dr. Chapel-Love can speak to some of the cultural competency training that is currently provided.
Certainly, thank you, Assemblymember Torres. To speak to your point, this is 100% a concern that we grieve in the mental health field. Speaking only for myself, certainly. We are currently required, as I said, as part of our doctoral and/or master's or graduate level training to receive multicultural related competencies. Once a person hits the field, however, as an independently licensed practitioner, it is entirely up to them. So for myself, as a Black psychologist, I make it my business to continue this, because in the exact same way that I would like to know the most up-to-date methods and the most up-to-date research, this is how I practice. There are certainly a large number of clinicians that do this, and it's my belief that this bill would encourage other folks who maybe have less time or who are less motivated motivated to do so would now have yet another reason, in addition to serving the communities that we're all here for. So there are certainly a number of multicultural related competencies for master's level clinicians on up. It is right now the clinician's prerogative to seek this out, which is one of
the scheme of diversity, right? There is also an absence of research that's being elevated by persons of color in order to examine and deal with the issues, right? And so that's another space. I don't have to legislate individuals getting together to then start getting their research, number one, elevated to the space where, number one, it is two, that the skills and expertise that is already out there for the training that you would like to exhibit, right? I mean, it's good. We can theorize and put anything in statute, but it's about the action that happens after and how you come together. Because if the expectation is, oh, we'll all voluntarily do this and we'll think on the same framework that needs to be presented, it's not going to happen. It never happens that way. It happens by direct action after the bill is created. And I just wanted to mention the research piece because that's a very, very, very huge part of how you understand and how you learn your skill set. If you don't have the research for diverse thought, you cannot process and then implement understanding those complexities of race, sex, and other things.
Thank you, Vice Chair Neal, Assemblywoman Torres, for the record. And I think that's something that we could definitely continue to work on.
Committee members, if you have questions, just feel free to unmute yourself to let the chair know. Madam Chair, I don't believe there's any more questions.
Okay, so I just have a couple. Dr. Chapel-Love, this weekend, and again, thank you all for the for the recognition this weekend for the award. I really enjoyed hearing the portion. I believe it was a psychologist from Arizona, and I hope I'm saying that right, who happened to be an African-American woman, and she went through the history of how racism has become so embedded in the medical structure that we don't even recognize that it's there. And she talked about several things to include the notion early on, I think she says like 1800s or something like that, where it was believed that people of African descent had smaller brains and therefore were not as able to think as consistently cogent as those of European descent. She also dealt with the fact with what happened at Tuskegee. She also dealt with Henrietta Lacks and the fact that her cells have been used to study and also bring cure for many diseases. Henrietta happened to be a Black woman with cancer, and their mother sacrificed her cells, have not been properly compensated. Students have traditionally been seen as slow, and many of them have been in a revelatory period, meaning that there are more and more people espoused in European theory, indeed have no. This is my point. We talk a lot about doing this, and Assemblywoman Torres, if you are amenable to an amendment, deaf, and was signing, was stopped by an officer. She couldn't hear. Her children were saying she can't hear what you're saying. And I understand that you may not be able to teach sign language, but there should be something. Cultural competency should exist so that when you come into contact with people who are differently abled, you know exactly, let's press the microphone. I've got some card here, can call somebody. So the cultural competency piece, I think the Vice Chair brought up a great point. It's good for us to pass this, but we have to make sure that the cultural competency training includes culturally competent trainers. And I've gone a long way around, saying that this is indeed a weak link, not just in Nevada. And I'll say this and I'll be quiet, but But you know, I continue to hear people say, well, COVID revealed, and we saw this. No. For those of us who have been living with implicit bias, not just in medicine, but in every other aspect of life, it may be new to some people, but we have lived this. We've lived this. And so, you know, I say, welcome to the party. Now what you're going to do since you're here. So number one, if you can just speak a little bit about the historic aspects of how BIPOC communities, people who are differently abled, those who identify, have a gender identification, different gender presentation, how does that influence where we are now? And I think that that is the linchpin, if you will, as to why this legislation is so necessary. We had, I think it was Senate Bill 413 last time that dealt with cultural competency, and I think they got started with it. I don't know that they finished it at the same level that they started, but certainly we have not yet arrived at the place where we can say, Houston, we have liftoff.
Thank you for the statement and the question, Senator Chair Spearman. Assemblywoman Torres, for the record, and I think that would be a phenomenal addition, you know, to the piece of legislation, not only further defining cultural competency to ensure that, you know, it captures individuals from that are differently abled and, you know, communities of color, and ensuring that, you know, individuals of in the LGBTQ community are also captured in cultural competency training, I think would be super helpful. And then ensuring too, you know, as Senator Neal said earlier this morning, that the voices and the research from diverse communities is kind of at the forefront of that training, and that the leaders that we have, you know, within those professions here in Nevada have a voice at that. And I think that Dr. Chapel Love and Dr. Sandra Gray are both, you know, phenomenal examples of that, and have been, you know, leaders and advocates for this in their own space. And I think that leaders like that should be at the forefront of creating those trainings.
Thank you. Dr. Chapel Love, can you speak a little bit to the historic piece as well? Thank you, Assemblywoman.
Absolutely. Dr. Chapel Love, for the record, and thank you, Vice Chair Neal and Chair Spearman as well. Historically, so I'm going to try and keep this short because I certainly talk for a living, but historically, implicit bias has exactly been that, a linchpin, making the difference between if I am placed in special education for perhaps being talkative in class versus perceived as aggressive or perceived in some other way. Certainly the intersectionality of a lot of those pieces related to disability, related to neurodiversity, related to things such as sexual orientation or presentation of gender. Those have been the pieces that have negatively impacted us. And when I say us, I certainly mean marginalized communities. Being able to take a look at that historical perspective from several diagnostic statistical manuals ago, where homosexuality, for example, was included in there. If I'm a clinician that had my training 20 years ago, I might be a juggernaut in the field. The concern is, what have you learned related to this particular hemisphere since then? Or what have you brought from that 20 years ago training? I certainly refer to myself as a bit of a dinosaur in the field, having graduated, only several years ago. Really hard to do that with this field and for it. So historically, implicit biases look like a range of things, from the school to prison pipeline to who gets labeled a certain thing, to how many times have I spoken with someone who says, yep, hey doc, I've had a diagnosis of bipolar because I get angry. This relates to how to speak with people, to how to acknowledge and adhere to a person's culture. Well, hey, I don't smoke tobacco. Why is this indigenous person offering me this? Being able to relate to the people that we're speaking is literally a life-saving circumstance. To, for example, refer to a gender diverse child by their personal, not preferred, but personal pronouns is one of the pieces that research as of late has shown or suggested to be a literal suicide prevention tool. To me, this is some of the historical perspective and why it's so drastically important. And to your point, Vice Chair Neal, the importance of offering evidence-based, either from individuals within said communities or individuals who are tangential to those communities, is especially important. Absolutely.
I don't have it right now, but I want to ask if staff could pull it up. I don't know how many of you all saw a very disturbing video yesterday of a elementary school principal in Florida who paddled a 6-year-old who was 3 feet tall and weighed about 40 pounds, and paddled her for putting a scratch on a computer screen. And the question now is it not just dismissal, but is it felony child abuse? And if you watch the video, and I wasn't able to watch it, I watched it all the way through one time, I couldn't watch it again. But if you watch the video, you see how cultural competency, or the lack thereof, comes into play in every aspect of our lives. And so if we can't get this correct in the medical field, particularly when you're talking about mental and emotional health, then God help us. Let me say this, and I just want to put this on the record. I don't know what paradigm will be useful for pursuing the pedagogical shifts in terms of how people in this field are taught, trained, etc. But the thing that I anticipate we will hear the most is we don't have the money, or it will cost us a lot of money. Or if we are forced to do this, then we can't do that. And I would submit to everyone that all of us make choices. When I got my first car, I knew how much it was going to cost. I knew I didn't have it, so I made the choice to sacrifice some things to save for it. And I think all of us have done that. I know that there will be people who say that the budget can't stand it, that we can't do this because we're at a budgetary shortfall and this, that, and the other. Well, part of the reason that we are having the types of budgetary challenges that we are right now is because the healthcare system has failed BIPOC communities. And if you don't change your engine regularly, you're going to have to replace the engine. So if you don't change your oil regularly, you have to replace the engine. So I just want to put this out there and say that this is something that certainly we do need. If we're going to come back as a whole community, then this is something that we certainly need. And I think that it is worth, this is a policy committee. I'm understanding that, so nobody has to text me or email me or whatever and say this is not, I understand this is a policy committee, but it's the policy that drives the finances. And so if we can't figure out how to make sure that this training is embedded in everything that we do, and I would go so far as to say it should be embedded not just in the initial licensing, but every now and then there should be a refresher course that's mandatory, because you can't do a one and done when you've got something that has been so flagrant for more than 400 years. You know, COVID revealed what most of us who have lived through this understood, knew, was passed down and taught and thought about and taught to us since 1619. So having said that, I understand that there may be some challenges in terms of how we rearrange this and how we rearrange that. And please don't come to me, anyone, talking about, well, we're going to have to, well, that means we'll have to pit this against doing something for senior citizens, or pit this against doing something for children. And it's the wrong idea. We're all smart people here, and we ought to be able to figure this out. This is something that is immensely important because we have people who are dying. And I'll lift Susan Moore. Dr. Susan Moore. And if you don't know her, please Google her name, Dr. Susan Moore, who died of complications of COVID-19. She was studied, approved, licensed as a medical doctor. Fortunately, she happened to be a Black woman. And those who were in charge of her care at a teaching hospital in Indiana refused to listen to her and what needed to happen. And in her words, in her last video, said they treated her like she was a drug dealer. I'm not casting aspersions on everyone in the field. I'm simply saying that if we don't correct this, we have a moral obligation to correct this. And if we don't, history will not be kind to us. I'll get off my soapbox now. Are there any other questions from the committee members?
Madam Chair, it doesn't appear to be.
Okay. Broadcast, let's go to the phones now, and we will go to, excuse me, 20 minutes per and 3 minutes per individual.
Thank you, Chair. To speak in support on AB 327, please press star 9 now to enter the queue. Again, to testify in support to AB 327, please press star 9 now to enter the queue. Will the caller with the last 3 digits, 576, please slowly state and spell your name for the record? You may now begin.
Well, good morning, Chair Spearman and members of the committee. My name is Eric Jeng, ERICJENG, speaking on behalf of the Asian Community Development Council. The Asian Community Development Council is in support of AB 327. Nevada is home to more than 300,000 Asian Pacific Islander Americans. We're just here yesterday celebrating Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. Our community are aware of a lot of time firsthand experiences of the infrastructure and our healthcare, especially mental health providers, are not meeting up the needs on cultural sensitivity, and we're not even talking about language barrier yet. And that has been a tremendous strife for our communities. Right now, over 24 million Americans nationwide are AAPI. About 2/3 of the population identify with their specific ethnicity or country of origin. Language barrier make it difficult for Asian Americans to access mental health services. Discussing mental health concerns is considered taboo in many Asian cultures. Because of this, we have a lower rate tend to dismiss, deny, or neglect their need of care. According to National Alliance of Mental Illness, NAMI, study shows that a strong sense of ethnic identities is linked to lower suicide rate risks and predicts higher resilience in the face of racial discrimination, which is increasingly an issue. Given the vast diversity of AAPI groups, culturally competent provider for these communities show a strong desire to establish a trust-based therapeutic relationship with individuals they're treating through effective listening and willingness to learn. A culturally confident provider may also demonstrate knowledge and acknowledgement of cultural bound syndromes. AB 327 is a cost-effective and critical step to ensure that all Nevadans have access to quality mental health services. Culture competency trainings for mental health providers will allow our community members to feel more comfortable, access mental health services, and we ask you to support AB 327. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. Will the caller with the last 3 digits, 202, please slowly state and spell your name for the record? You may now begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Paige Barnes, Paigebarnes. I'm with Crowley and Ferrata Public Affairs, here today representing the Nevada Nurses Association. We are here in support of AB 327. I want to thank Assemblywoman Torres for her work on the bill and willingness to collaborate. The Nevada Nurses Association believes this bill is very timely. Our nurses have experienced the benefit of the LGBTQI training provided in a hospital setting implemented as a result of 2019 legislation. We believe that AB 327 is the next logical step and a long overdue step. As Assemblywoman Torres mentioned, we requested the expansion of the CEUs to apply to all nurses. We believe that all of our nurses and all of our patients will benefit from the education of cultural competency. Nevada has a vast array of cultures in the state. Diversity is part of what makes Nevada home. It's important that our nurses have the education to treat each patient as an individual with respect to their culture. Again, I want to thank Assemblywoman Torres for bringing forward the bill and collaborating with us in the Assembly. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, caller. Will the caller with the last three digits, 013, please slowly state and spell your name for the record? You may now begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. My name is Lorenzita Santos, Lorenzita, Lorenzita, Santos, Santos, and I'm the Outreach Coordinator for One API in Nevada. We are here to support AB 327. When I was 15, I had a mental health crisis and I had to undergo intensive psychiatric care at Seven Hills Behavioral Health Hospital. Since then, I had to meet with several mental health professionals to talk about my struggles as a second-generation Filipino American and as a member of the LGBTQ+ community. Many health professionals I spoke with lacked fundamental knowledge about the AAPI issues, and I would have to dedicate time during these sessions to explain the basics. Each session that was not successful not only cost time, but cost money. The lack of cultural competency is a barrier for me and members of the AAPI community. In fact, of all groups, AAPI adults are the least likely to seek mental health services. By having a cultural competency training, it ensures that members of the AAPI community are heard, understood, and properly cared for. I urge you to support AB 327. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. Will the caller with the last three digits, 214, please slowly state and spell your name for the record? You have 2 minutes and you may now begin.
Madam Chair and members of the committee, for the record, my name is Dr. Laura Drucker. That's Lauradrucker. I'm a psychologist and member of the Nevada Psychological Association, and I'm here this morning to offer NPA support of AB 327. Our organization has submitted a letter in support of this bill. NPA supports AB 327 because we recognize the importance of requiring cultural competency training in the licensure process for all mental and behavioral health clinicians. NPA also appreciates the opportunity to have had a productive meeting with the sponsor of this bill to discuss the language and implementation of the bill, and along with Dr. Chapel Love, offer our ongoing willingness to be involved in the process of improving awareness of diversity, equity, and inclusion needs in our community. In listening to the testimony and questions today, we agree that this legislation does not guarantee cultural competency, but it does reflect a statewide commitment to the process, which in light of the rising awareness in our country of systemic and structural racial, ethnic, gender, and economic disparities, has become even more important for professionals who are providing mental and behavioral health care to traditionally underrepresented and underserved communities to engage in continuous training in the best practices. NPA also is in support of the need to train, recruit, and retain a more diverse mental and behavioral health workforce in Nevada. Thank you to Assemblywoman Torres and the committee for your work on this important legislation.
Thank you, caller. Will the caller with the last three digits, 130, please slowly state and spell your name for the record? You have 2 minutes. You may now begin.
Good morning, Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Christine Saunders. That's CHRISTINESAUNDERS. I'm a Policy Director with the Progressive Leadership Alliance in Nevada. On behalf of PLAN, the Nevada Immigrant Coalition, and myself as a social work educator, I want to echo the sentiments of those who spoke before me and add our support to the record. We urge you to support this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. Chair, there are no more callers in support at this time.
Okay, let's go to those in opposition. Same parameters.
Thank you, Chair. To testify in opposition on AB 327, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Again, to testify in opposition on AB 327, please press star 9 now to enter the queue. Chair, we have No callers in opposition at this time.
And we'll go to those in neutral.
Thank you. To testify in neutral on AB 327, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Again, to testify in neutral on AB 327, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. And Chair, looks like there is no callers in neutral at this time.
Okay, thank you. Assemblywoman Torres, as you come back, I want to read something from the Department of Defense. And one of the things that, even though we know that there have been some who have infiltrated the ranks of the military by and large, those of us who have served and those who are serving despise any type of denigration based upon ethnicity and, to some chagrin, even gender presentation or identification. But I want to read something to you that is found on the Department of Defense's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion page. And Madam Secretary, I'll make sure that you have this link. Changing face of the nation demands that we change. As the demographic makeup of the American population continues to evolve, it is imperative that the Department of Defense focus its efforts on emerging talent to ensure that we successfully attract, recruit, develop, and retain highly skilled total force capacity of meeting current and future mission requirements. And as a graduate of the Department of Defense Equal Opportunity Management Institute, I will tell you that that is a mission statement that has been around since the 70s. And although not perfect, I know that our military is working to do that. And I only say that because if we have men and women of our service who are willing to lay their lives down on the line for us, to help us become a more perfected union and to help those around the globe who want to participate in democracy. If they're willing to do that, then I think that we as a state can do no less. Assemblywoman Torres, please.
Thank you, Chair. Assemblywoman Torres, for the record, and I would like to go to Dr. Chapelov if she has any closing remarks, and then I'll close. And Dr. Chapelov, feel free to say no.
I do not, Assemblymember. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, committee, for hearing the presentation for AB 327 this morning. I think that this piece of legislation is extremely timely, and unfortunately too timely. In light of the movements of the Black Lives Matter and the protests from this summer, and with the unfortunate height of Asian hate crimes that we have seen throughout the nation, I think that this piece of legislation couldn't be more timely. And I have no doubt that this will ensure that communities that are historically disenfranchised have better access to quality care, to health care, mental care. And, I want to close by saying that, if anybody listening to this hearing is in need of services, please call 211. There are services in the state that are available now. And we need to, I think that this legislative body plays a key role in defeating the stigma towards receiving help for mental health care. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. And with that, we will close. Assemblywoman Torres, if you will get with Mr. Margarejo, and let's try to see what we can do in terms of a friendly amendment that will help strengthen the bill. So with that, we will close the hearing on Assembly Bill 327, and we'll open the hearing on Assembly Bill 359. Assemblywoman Considine, I believe you're in person. Revises provisions governing trade practices.
Thank you very much, Chair Spearman, Vice Chair Neal, and members of the Senate Commerce and Labor Committee. For the record, my name is Venetia Considine. I represent Assembly District 18, which is in southeast Las Vegas and Henderson. And I'm here to present AB 359, which revises provisions governing trade practices. For a little bit of background, about 850,000 Nevadans speak a language other than English at home. That's more than 1 in 4. It's also about 31% of our population. Of that group, about 70% for that language is Spanish. Between 1980 and 2018, Nevada had an increase of over 1,000% in those speaking a foreign language at home. That is the largest percentage increase in the country. These populations are vibrant markets for goods and services. When a business entity reaches out to a community that speaks a language other than English with the intent to create a business relationship with that community or with members of that community and advertises to that community using the language of that community, AB 359 establishes the follow-through of that transaction, of that relationship. From creating the market relationship to creating the final documentation, that's where AB 359 comes in. I created or worked on AB 359 for several months, and this bill is narrow. It deals with businesses who avail themselves of a community that speaks a language other than English, inviting them to create a market, create a relationship to purchase goods and services. And when somebody from that community comes to that business and agrees, negotiates, or creates a transaction to get that, and that requires a contract, this bill requires that that contract be in the language that the advertisement was in. So it is narrow. Businesses that advertise, and they must advertise in that language, then must have that contract. And one of the big reasons that I believe that this bill is incredibly important is that if you sign a contract for a good or service in a language that you cannot read, that you have negotiated in your language and you have been invited to that business in your language, and there is a disagreement that results in having to go to court, the court will look at that contract. And oftentimes, if you are unable to read that contract, you may have agreed to something you were unaware of, or the terms that you believed you were agreeing to are not what is stated in the contract. So AB 359 creates the follow-through from the beginning to the negotiation or the transaction to the contract, all being in that same language. That's the genesis and the purpose of this bill. I would like to go over the bill. There's also a conceptual amendment. It should have been mailed to everyone on this committee. It is also available on Nellis, and I would like to incorporate that amendment as I go through. And I just wanted to remind that the point of this is the intent is not to harm small businesses. The intent is to encourage these vibrant marketplaces on both sides so that there is an understanding that if you are being invited in a language other than English to come and purchase a good or a service that requires a contract, that you also feel confident that you will have the ability to read that contract, understand that contract, and both sides are on the same page. So sections 2 and 3 are essentially just definitions. Section 3, subsection 2 includes the language that without limitation, any subsequent document that makes substantial changes to the rights and obligations of the parties must be in the language of the advertisement as well. So the initial contract and anything that changes the terms of that contract needs to be in that language. Subsection 3 goes over terms that are not included. So a subsequent document authorized or contemplated by the original document described in subsection 2 do not need to be translated into that community language. This includes the periodic statements, sales slips or invoices pursuant to a credit card agreement, memoranda of purchases and an add-on sale, documents relating to the refinancing of a purchase as approved for or required by the original document or the document described in subsection 2, matters incorporated during the regular course of business and contracts or agreements that result from a transaction listed in paragraph B of subsection 3 of section 4 of this act. This includes the rules and the regulations governing a tenancy and inventories or furnishings. So again, this goes back to attempting to not harm businesses, but to find that balance between the buyer and the seller. Section 4 Subsection 1, a person who in the course of his or her business or occupation advertises in a language other than English and negotiates orally or in writing any of the transaction listed in subsection 3 in a language other than English, or who allows an employee or agent of the person to advertise in a language other than English and to negotiate orally or in writing any of the transaction listed in subsection 3 in a language other than English, shall deliver a translation of the contract or agreement that results from such advertising and negotiations in the language that was used in the advertisement and negotiation of the contract or agreement to the person who is the party to the contract or the agreement. That's really the whole meat of this bill. The translation must be provided to the person who is a party and include without limitation every term and condition in the contract or agreement. Subsection 3, person must provide, pursuant to subsection 1, a translation of the contract that results from the following transactions. And these lists the main transactions. A lot of these are done in other states, so I just wanted to make sure that the committee understood that Nevada is not the first one that is working on having some of these contracts translated into other languages. Other states have varying requirements of this. So this would include a loan or extension of credit that is secured by property other than real property used for personal, family, or household purposes, a lease, sublease, rental contract or agreement, or other contract or agreement containing a term of tenancy if the lease, sublease, rental contract or agreement or other contract or agreement is for a period of at least 1 month and applies to a dwelling, apartment, mobile home, or other dwelling unit that is used as a residence. Or C, except as otherwise provided in this paragraph, an unsecured loan that is used for personal, family, or household purposes. The line after that, referring to the credit instrument as defined in NRS 463.01467, is not an unsecured loan for the purposes of this paragraph. That specifically refers to gaming markers that was requested by the gaming industry, and that is why that is in there. At this time, I would also like to incorporate the amendment because it fits within this section. The amendment, I've worked with the Banking Association to obtain this amendment to this bill. What this includes is that for the banks in Nevada, they're only under this bill, if it were to pass, for credit cards and auto loans. The reason for this is twofold. On one side, I've spoken to many communities, minority communities, and entities around the state to find out what their top issues are in dealing with banks and their comfort level where they are talking to someone in a banking situation in a language other than English, and what they feel are the important items. And there was a list of these items. Credit card applications and auto loans were some of the top. So that was a benefit, I believe, to the communities that were worried about potentially losing access to these products if this bill were to pass and have any unintended consequences with the banking industry. So that is why Section 4 is here, and that is where that amendment would fit in. On Section 5, these are concerning regulations, federal regulations, M, Z, RESPA, TILA, and how those would need to be translated as well. Section 5, subsection 2, refers to Consumer Leasing Act, Regulation M, Z, Truth in Lending, a follow-up on that. Section 8, one of the issues we wanted to make clear on this bill is that if there are contracts that there are certain things in each contract by each consumer that would be different. For example, any numbers, percentages, that information that there are certain things that don't need to be translated. And that's what Section 8 refers to. So in any contracts, the names and titles of persons, addresses, brand names, trademarks, registered service marks, abbreviated designations that are well known, alphanumeric codes, numerals, things that I had just mentioned, and individual words or expressions that do not have a generally accepted non-English translation are not required to be translated into these contracts. So if an entity that rented furniture or sold tires or something like that had a contract that was translated in the non-English language of a community that they advertised to, they could have the lines to fill in this type of information. They don't have to completely redo a contract for that information. Sections 10 through the rest of the bill are conforming language, and also the language to enforce that if a business reaches out to a community using the language of that community and negotiates the transaction in that language and then fails to provide a contract, that it is a deceptive trade practice, and there is a private right of action for that. I know that is a lot of information. I appreciate your patience going through that, and I am here to answer any questions. Thank you. I apologize. The other part of the amendment was to add Assemblywoman Heidi Kasama as a co-sponsor. Thank you.
Thank you. You have additional presenters or go to questions and answers?
No additional presenters. I know that everyone is very busy. We're getting towards the end of the session, so I am here to present and answer any questions. Thank you.
Oh, we've been waiting on you. We carved out the whole last part of the meeting just for you. Committee members, anyone have any questions?
Madam Chair, Joe Hardy.
Yes. Yes, sir. Senator Hardy.
Simple question. On the conceptual amendment, section 1, subsection 4, what does section 1 allude to? Is that here because there's no subsections 2, 3, 1, 2, or 3?
Thank you for the question. For the record, Venetia Considine, I apologize. This was specifically created for section 4. It should just say section 4. This was done sort of yesterday, and I wanted to get something down and in an amendment and in the committee prior to the hearing. So on that, I did make a mistake. I do plan on working with LCB or working with who I need to make sure that the intent of this is properly translated. Thank you.
So it's just section 4, subsection 4 you're putting in. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Additional questions?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Yes.
Thank you. So I like your bill. So I'm trying to understand. So the amendment narrows it to just those two categories?
Thank you for the question, Vice Chair Neal. For the record, Venetia Considine. So for banks in Nevada, that the banks would only need to follow this bill if it was to pass, yes, and only those two areas for those applying for credit cards, those agreements, and for auto loans.
So I wanted to ask a question because the in section 4 sub 3A, you're excluding real property, and actually buying a house is a very huge transaction that should be in the language of the person who's purchasing it, because that's ripe for, number one, getting abused with the interest rate, with the terms of the loan not being super clear on, even just people who speak English still have to go through the process of all the disclosures and everything that's associated with the transaction. And I see that you've excluded the refinancing in another section of the bill. And so, because the way I read your exclusions, which are in, I thought that was in section 8. You had a refinance language in there, and it was additional. It doesn't include, it was the document lease and the information where you had, it doesn't include these subcategories, and one of them looked like it was refi. And so I don't know why you would exclude those things, because those are major pieces. You could refi and not even know. It's in section 3. It's the line that says documents relating to the refinancing of a purchase, which is in what is that, sub 3.4, line 16 through 17. So I want to know why you would exclude tangential, because even if you chose to say, you're like, I know what Senator Neal is saying, but I do credit cards and auto loan would have a refi. So why would that document not be a companion?
Thank you for the question, Vice Chair Neal. For the record, Venetia Considine. To your first question concerning mortgages, Of the states that I reviewed that have these types of laws on the book and what they cover and they don't cover, what I could not find is a state that covered mortgages, because there are issues with preemption issues and also issues with secondary markets of purchasing of mortgages. So that was something, I do not disagree with what you would like to see in the bill, but it was also a matter of what we could do in this bill and meet all of the stakeholders and move from there. The refinance, the intention was that HELOCs and things like that would be included in this, so thank you for bringing that language to my attention. I will look at that much closer, but I do agree with your overall assessment, and I believe that this is a good first step for folks that are consumers that are getting into markets and that want and need contracts that they can read and understand, balanced with the not harming businesses, which is why I tried to narrow it as much as I did.
So you do agree that refinance, the documents that's in line 15 through 16, is the exclusion of a document that's related to a refinance of a purchase?
Thank you for the question. That is something that I need to look a little bit closer at, because I did not initially read it that way, but now I will go back and review it for that.
So, because here's the thing though. I understand, and I'm pro-business, but I'm also pro-people. And at the end of the day, they're already engaging in the market, right? They didn't just happenstance to get into it. They're in the market now, and I feel like we always have to, and I know that this is a good bill, and this is your baby step in, and I'm sure that the lobbying groups were like, please baby step your way into this. But I also feel like this is a consumer protection piece that's been well needed for a long time. And it's not clear to me how people interpret communities or communities of color as like, oh, well, they're not really credit this or credit that. But typically it's because they don't understand the terms that they're getting involved with. And that hurts their credit, right? Because they sign a bad deal and then they can't pay it. It's a balloon payment. It's all these things that they're, or some freaking 35% interest rate on a vehicle where you're just like, I can't even believe that you did this. But they don't know, right? And so I rather lean more towards people than business in this circumstance, because what you know and what you read is very, very important to the signature and the legal contract that you are now bound to. And I think that has been a problem for them, because then they're bound to a contract that they didn't understand all of the terms. And then you have limited the categories to a degree where I feel like some of the things that you've excluded, like you have credit cards, but in your exclusion, you don't want the sales slips or invoices which represent the purchases made pursuant to the credit card agreement. And I'm like, okay, but what if your invoice is incorrect and you still speak 70% of your language is some other language? You now have to figure out how to assess your billing and then have a conversation with someone in English about your billing, but your billing is one of the key places where you argue. We do that all the time. You're like, I don't know what this is, but I didn't do this. And it's a direct sourcing to identity theft, the invoice. And so communities of color are highly likely to be exposed to identity theft. And then the responsibility on the bank says, you are supposed to review your statement and then come in and challenge us about what was in your statement. That is literally a rule in the bank. It's like a duty on the customer to review and then give timely notice to the bank that this happened. And if you're like, I don't know what this was, I don't know what this means, how do you deal with that provision in the bill? You know what I'm saying?
Thank you, Vice Chair Neal. This, for the record, Venetia Considine. Yes, this was a balancing act. And when I started my legal career, I was a consumer protection attorney. These are things that I would like to see changed, and have seen several sessions go by where things like this did not pass. And I believe that getting something like this passed to begin with, bringing business in a way that they can not only see the benefits of doing this, but also get used to the fact that this is where this country is going. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau has put out guidelines that these are things that they plan to see in the future and they plan to work on. This is, I think, where it begins, and having something that brought in stakeholders from all sides was important to not only get it passed, but to get the conversation started and working in the future. I agree with all of your assessments as far as everything would be great if it was in languages that folks spoke, but this is the place where we begin, and hopefully that changes fairly soon over each billing agreement, each periodic statement, all of the items that you brought up. This is a starting place. Thank you.
So I just have one final question. So how will the education piece happen? This bill passes, which I'm sure it will, because in Section 9, you have, if a person fails to comply with the provisions, the aggrieved party may rescind the contract. Who's responsible for letting them know that? And what's the education campaign that's being placed upon the businesses to make sure that the individuals know that this bill passed and that they can rescind this contract if there is failure to give it to them in their language?
That education would be twofold. One would be educating the businesses that if this bill were to pass, that this bill is law, and then what is required to do them. I would hope to use local and statewide chambers to assist in that education. On the other side, for the consumers, then that would be through consumer groups, that would be through BIPOC groups in all of the communities, and getting that word out in the way that we always try to get words out on both ends of those sides. Also, alerting any consumer attorneys in the state and other entities that work with consumer protection laws and with low-income people that these things tend to target and tend to have the most impact on, working with them to get that information out as well.
So thank you for that. So when you get this passed, I really do like your bill. I know I'm giving you a hard time, but I really do. I like your bill. For my district in particular, Senate District 4, this would be super helpful because I have a conglomerate of communities of color in Senate District 4. And so I can tell you, as soon as this passes, I'll be the first person to be trying to get you to educate through some Zoom or posting on Facebook about understanding their rights. And I want to make sure, because I don't see your effective date on here. So do you want to make your effective date upon passage and approval, or are you trying to do it July 1st? Because I think the default is October 1st.
Thank you for the question, Venetia Considine, for the record. The date would be October 1st to ensure that the translations of any of these contracts can be done and that education can go out. And I am happy and the first one there with you to work with your communities, because I think that educating the communities and giving communities of folks who speak a language other than English a comfort level and a confidence to go into the business communities and even begin asking for these outside of the four corners of this bill, hopefully will be a benefit of this bill as well.
Good job. I rarely give compliments, but I really like this bill.
Thank you.
Wow, what if she didn't like it? Anyway, committee members, additional questions? So, most of the time I'm silent because the questions always deal with some part of the law, and I've not been formally trained in law school, so I just kind of stay in my lane. but business is in my lane. So, Assemblywoman, let me ask you this, and maybe it might be a statement more than a question. So I got my doctorate is in business administration, and one of the first things we studied before we even started doing research were three actual concepts. And as I looked at your bill and I listened to our vice chair's questions, I thought about those concepts, and this is one way that I can see that it minimizes any misinterpretation about is this pro-business and anti-consumer, or is it pro-consumer and anti-business? And all too often in this building, we many pieces of the legislation are broken down like that, as if you can't do both. But I think we can. So let me just put this out here. One of the terms is value proposition. Value proposition is customer focused. It's not just about the tangible benefits, but the other benefits that your customers, your current customers and future customers might see. The next one is differentiation, and that means what part of the niche of the market are you in? What separates you from everybody else? And the last one would be something I focused on when doing my doctoral research, and that is competitive advantage. So as I look at your bill, it seems to me that it's taking probably the value proposition, because we are such a diverse society now, and even the differentiation, and combining those two. And if you do what your bill says, then it actually gives you a competitive advantage. That's part one. Yes or no?
Chair Spearman, for the record, Venetia Considine, yes. So then to go back to what the vice chair just said, you're not talking about harming small businesses. It actually could help small businesses carve out their own niche in certain marketplaces. I used to be surprised 15, 20 years ago when I ride through a city or whatever, get in the airport, and you see a sign that says hablo en español, and then hablo en español también. And those signs are becoming more and more frequent, and I think that is a direct result of the fact that people recognize that we're becoming a more diverse society. I've also noticed that even in some of the media ads, TV ads, there's more diversity when you start looking at things like families, you look at things like buyers, et cetera, et cetera. How can this be something that consumers could use? If you're talking about teaching, how could this be something that consumers could use to say, I'm going to look at these 3 points for everything that I do, anything I buy, especially major purchases, et cetera. I'm going to look at it from the standpoint of value proposition. What does that mean for me, both now and in long term? What does that mean in terms of differentiation? Well, I only shop here because they do these sorts of things as a competitive advantage, because it moves them over to the side. I hope this is not too convoluted. What does that mean for the consumer? How would you start a training off by saying that? And my point is, I'm trying to make sure that people understand that because you're for this bill doesn't mean that you're against business. Does that make sense to you? Chair Spearman, for the record, Venetia Considine, yes, it does. There's a lot of layers in that. I would want to start off just reiterating that the linchpin of this bill is that businesses that are reaching into those communities because they have a budget, they're spending money on advertising into that community that speaks a language other than English. This is the starting point. So this, in a way, encourages those businesses that are already doing it to potentially expand their market, because now that they are already spending money in that area, they just need to translate some contracts in those specific languages. As other businesses, hopefully, see the market bandwidth expand on this, especially working with consumers who speak primarily the language other than English, feeling more comfortable creating those business relationships. The idea is that pushes all of this forward, that what is contemplated by the Consumer Protection Bureau in financial documents, which is also the trend of not only Nevada but the country, that all of that Nevada businesses ride that wave in a way. I hope that sort of answers the portion of your question. The goal here when working with the stakeholders was not to harm businesses that are coming out of a pandemic if they are not advertising in these languages and did not have the funding to not only not advertise, but to create any translations, to not require them to do this. This was the middle ground that we tried to walk on this that helps both sides, but ideally encourages businesses to say, okay, you know what, I'm in a district that is heavily populated by Spanish speakers or Tagalog speakers or Korean speakers. Now I am going to advertise because now I am going to budget money not only for the contract for the item that we sell, but also for the advertising, and those will work together to create a better relationship with that portion of the community. I'm not sure if if what I've said responds to all of your concerns, but I'm happy to follow up on anything that I missed.
Thank you. I led you through a maze and you came out successfully. I'll put one other thing on that you might want to consider, the McKinsey report. I think the most recent one indicates that businesses that value diversity and act in marketing and every other way, acknowledging the diversity of the world really, their profit margins increase sometimes as much as 30%. So with that, any other questions, committee members? Anyone? Okay, broadcast, let's go to the phones. We will go first to those in support. 20 minutes, 2 minutes, 3 minutes per individual.
Thank you, Chair. If you would like to testify in support of AB 359, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits of 828, please slowly spell and state your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Sophia, Sophia, Romero, Romero. Good morning, Chair Spearman, Vice Chair Neal, and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Sophia Romero, and I am a staff attorney in the Consumer Rights Project at Legal Aid Center of Southern Nevada. Thank you for the opportunity to testify here today in support of AB 359. AB 359 goes a long way to solving a problem we see regularly. People come to us because they signed a contract that was written in English despite not being able to read it, because they relied on what they were told by the person on the other side of the table. People in this situation tend to go places that advertise that they speak a particular language. While this happens regularly with the Spanish-speaking community, it is also prevalent among the Asian American Pacific Islander communities as well. Often people in these situations tend to rely upon their children to translate, kids that are too young to enter into contracts themselves or who are unlikely to have the vocabulary or understanding to accurately translate these transactions. People who do not speak English tend to trust others who speak the same language as them. They believe what a person on the other side of the table is telling them. They believe that this person is truly trying to help them and try to take their money. Unfortunately, taking their money is all too often the result of these transactions. While we agree with the comments made by Vice Chair Neal, we believe that this bill is a vital first step in leveling the playing field for these people. This bill will have a great impact on breaking down the language barriers for non-English speaking communities and will help stop them from being targeted by the predatory business practices. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. Caller with the last 3 digits of 601, please slowly spell and state your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good morning, Chairwoman Spearman and other committee members. My name is Barbara Paulson, B-A-R-B-A-R-A-P-A-U-L-S-E-N, and I'm speaking today on behalf of Nevada's for the Common Good. We recognize the growing diversity in our population that's been discussed this morning, and we experience it ourselves in our member institutions. And have for our larger meetings, we provide a translation, and we also have written materials in both Spanish and English, which is the predominant other language that we have in our organization. We do this because we know that individuals best understand and interpret information when it is provided both verbally and written, and in a language that is both familiar and comfortable to them. As the number of individuals for whom English is not their primary language grows in our community, businesses also are expanding and are anxious to have these people as customers, have begun advertising their products and services, and conducting verbal transactions in these other languages. They do this recognizing that potential customers are more likely to respond to messages and information communicated in their primary language. As they are providing advertising and negotiating in the familiar language, it is their burden as part of their business to also have the written materials that people need to sign in the language with which they are familiar and comfortable. We thank Assemblywoman Considine for bringing this important bill forward. AB 359 is clear in its intent, its parameters, and the requirements it places on businesses, and it is a good first step in this process. It provides much needed and important consumer protection by requiring that these legally binding contracts or agreements between a business and its customers be written in the same language in which that transaction was advertised or verbally described. Nevadans for the Common Good stands in strong support for this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. Caller with the last three digits of 130. Please slowly spell and state your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good morning, Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Christine Saunders. That's CHRISTINESAUNDERS, and I'm Policy Director with Progressive Leadership Alliance in Nevada, here in support of Assembly Bill 359. We also want to thank Assemblywoman Considine for bringing this legislation forward. Nevada is the state with the largest immigrant population per capita, and immigrants are an important part of the fabric of our society. AB 359 guarantees that a contract must be available in language used in the negotiation, ensuring that no one can be taken advantage of by a contract they cannot confirm is in line with the conversation. This is an important consumer protection for many Nevadans, and we urge your support.
Thank you, caller. Caller with the last three digits of 261, please slowly spell and state your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good afternoon, thank you, or good morning, sorry. Thank you, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Jillian Block, that's GILLIANBLOCK, and I am calling today representing Washoe Legal Services. We are in support of AB 359. I echo the comments of the callers before me, and I just want to note that people with limited English proficiency are often vulnerable to predatory practices. And it's understandable for a person with limited English proficiency to put greater trust in the person who's advertising in the language that they understand best. And businesses often advertise in languages other than English, recognizing that potential customers would be more likely to respond. Simply put, if businesses advertise to non-English speaking communities in a language other than English, they should not be allowed to then take advantage of those same consumers by providing them with a contract in a language that they cannot fully understand. It is not sufficient to merely allow a consumer to rely on a friend, neighbor, or even their own child to translate important legal documents. AB 359 will put some important consumer protections in place by preventing these practices. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, caller. If you recently just joined us, we are currently in support of AB 359. If you'd like to testify in support, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, you have no more callers in support at this time.
Let's go to opposition.
If you would like to testify in opposition of AB 359, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, you have no callers in opposition at this time.
Neutral.
If you would like to testify neutral on AB 359, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, you have no callers neutral at this time.
Chair Spearman,
Thank you.
we have two individuals here neutral in person.
Okay. Yes, please proceed.
Good morning, Chair Spearman and members of the committee. For the record, Paul Moradkin, M-O-R-A-D-K-H-A-N, with the Vegas Chamber. The Chamber is neutral on the bill as revised and presented today. I'd like to thank the bill sponsor for reaching out to the Vegas Chamber and the business community and working with us on an amendment that has been adopted in this version relating the advertising standard. We believe that creating a tangible and measurable standard that can easily be determined, such as advertising, is fair to both the business and the customer. Thank you very much. Happy to take any questions.
Committee? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Moradkin.
Chair Spearman, members of the committee, my name is Connor Kane, C-O-N-N-O-R-C-A-I-N, and I'm testifying in neutral on Assembly Bill 359 on behalf of the Nevada Bankers Association. I'd like to first start by thanking Assemblywoman Considine for her willingness to work with us to balance the goals of reining in abusive practices while taking into consideration our industry's efforts to ensure that safe and highly regulated products and services are accessible and inclusive. One of the best examples of these efforts are accounts that are bank-on certified by the cities for financial empowerment. These are accounts that many of our members offer to expand banking access for consumers outside the financial mainstream. They are low or no cost and do not have overdraft fees. We want to ensure that consumers have access to mainstream banking accounts and aren't forced to rely on expensive alternative financial services. We again thank Assemblywoman Considine for her tireless work to strike the right balance on this bill and are grateful for the opportunity to appear before you in the neutral position. Thank you.
Questions, committee?
Chair, yes, I want to ask a question. So
Vice Chair.
Thank you. So I know you guys have worked out the issues with the bill and you guys are neutral because of that, and I understand. But why didn't the banks want to allow the language for statements and invoices?
Chair Spearman, through you to Assemblywoman Neal.
Just go direct.
Thank you, Chair. Assemblywoman Neal, that was actually not something that we had discussed with the bill sponsor, and it's something that I'm happy to go back and discuss with our client and with their members.
I mean, I personally think that it's a very important piece, and I mean, you've been representing the banks for a while, and so you know on the commercial paper side of it and how the rules work, that same thing I said in the hearing, that the notice provisions are on the customer to identify discrepancies, and that runs the clock on how you can fix something within the bank. And so I think that it's super, super important, you know, because it brings to mind when we worked together during the pandemic on trying to educate folks on the business rollout of the loans and how, you know, you guys were a great community partner there, and it made the sub-issues kind of rise to the top of the inequities in communities of color and how they cannot participate at the same level, mainly because lack of understanding on the complexity sometimes of the banks and the loans and the terms, etc. And I think that this is an opportunity to be a partner for those communities who we know are unbanked, who we know lose their bank accounts, who go into transactions not understanding, and now in the realm of Chime outside of Wells Fargo, that we are going into a whole nother space in banking where there are more opportunities to harm those communities versus before, because we're going beyond the brick and mortar bank. We're going to online apps that are allowing deposits and different things to go into folks' accounts. And I think that it's a wise move to at least contemplate this and to move in that direction. I personally think so, based on everything that's going on. And so I wanted to ask you directly, because I know that that's who, you work with the banks.
Chair Spearman, if I could, Assemblywoman Neal, I very much appreciate that comment. Appreciate your kind words about the work that the Nevada Bankers Association and its members did with different members of the community throughout the pandemic. It's something that they were committed to then and are committed to moving forward. And accessing safe, secure banking accounts, not only for individuals but also for businesses, is a huge issue. And it's something that we need to continue to work on. And I think there's absolutely a commitment from the Nevada Bankers Association to do that. We've had conversations with you about it. We've also had conversations with Chair Spearman, and she's even contemplated legislation this session that would ensure that a lot of those conversations are taking place through Senate Bill 145. So we're 100% committed to that. As it relates to the language, the particular language that you referenced, I'd be more than happy to circle back with Assemblywoman Considine. Again, it was something that had not come up in any conversations that we had with her, but would be more than happy to look at it.
Thank you.
Additional questions? Okay, thank you. Assemblywoman Considine, do you have any closing remarks?
Thank you. For the record, Venetia Considine, AB 359. I look forward to continuing conversations. I appreciate the committee's patience and questions and input. I thank you for that input and look forward to continuing to make this better in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, and please forgive me, I butchered your last name. I know that it's Considine, but thank you so much, and thank you for bringing the bill forward. And with that, we will close the hearing on Assembly Bill 359, and let's open it up to the anyone in the room who wants to participate in public comment.
Chair Spearman, there's nobody in the room.
Okay, so broadcast, let's go to the phones. Public comment.
Thank you, Chair. If anyone would like to speak in public comment, if you could please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, you have no one wishing to speak in public comment at this time.
Okay, let's wait 30 seconds more just in case someone's having some technical difficulties, okay?
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, broadcast. And thank you to everyone. Golly, I feel like there should be some more things we're doing. It's not yet 10:30. But anyway, we will get ready to adjourn this meeting. Committee members, are there any additional questions, comments relating to what we have discussed here? Okay. Okay. So that will conclude our meeting for today. Our next meeting will be tomorrow, Wednesday, May 5th at 8 o'clock. And the meeting is now adjourned. Thank you all and have a great day.